Admittedly, I haven't watched a ton of anime, but Code Geass has got to be the most anime show I've ever watched. It's rife with bombastic, over-the-top action, characters whose passions cannot be constrained by any mortal device and who are not afraid to proclaim their feelings at any given moment. Plans, plots, ploys, and counterplays that are explained in great detail, but happen so fast that it's easy to lose track of who's who, what's where, and which side is which. Epic stakes that concern the fate of the entire world, and of course, teenage drama. But most relevantly, for the sake of this particular video, Code Geass also contains philosophical debates about human nature. The show's climaxes, yes, there are two of them, both come about because the protagonist and antagonist have decidedly different views on how mankind should be treated, governed, and ruled. As you can probably tell, I will be discussing the show's ending, so full spoiler warning. But let's start near the beginning, for those of you who aren't familiar with this particular story and are okay learning how it ends from a random YouTuber. The main conflict in Code Geass arises because Japan has been conquered by an entity known as the Britannian Empire. Lelouch Lamperouge, introduced in the opening scene as a young child, is now a high school student who has all but forgotten his vow to destroy the empire that swallowed up his country, renaming it Area 11. The decade since that day wore down Lelouch's resolve. He is resigned to his inability to change the world and instead uses his considerable intellect to embarrass the rich and powerful at chess. That is, until he stumbles into the middle of a terrorist or freedom fighter, depending on whose side you're on, attack, and is given the mysterious power of Geass that allows him to command others, to override the free will of anyone who looks him in the eye. And if you're thinking, whoa, that's a pretty diabolical power for the protagonist of this story to wield, you're not wrong. This power, this Geass, which has been passed on from one wielder to another over the course of many, many untold years, though always manifesting in a different form, is very much not portrayed in a good light. C2, the immortal being who granted Lelouch his Geass, only did so in order to eventually have him take her place so she could finally, die. Her benefactor did the same thing to her, and doubtless there is a long line of Geass wielders who took on proteges with the sole purpose of finally ridding themselves of the power that has become a curse. Now, according to the philosophy of Code Geass, power does not so much corrupt the heart of man as it does wear on his soul, its awful weight grinding him down inexorably and inevitably the more he wields it. We are introduced to this theme in the opening episode of the show as Lelouch explains the reason for his unorthodox chess strategy.
You start with the king.
If the king doesn't lead, how can he expect his subordinates to follow?
Or, later in that same episode,
the only ones who should kill are those who are prepared to be killed.
And yes, I'm playing the clips in English for my English-speaking YouTube audience, most of whom are either listening to this while they do chores or using the soothing sound of my voice to fall asleep and don't want to have to look at their phone to read the subtitles. Also, Lelouch definitely would be speaking English here, so yeah. Weeb issues aside, this theme of the burden of power runs throughout the show, including when Prince Schneizel launches his flying fortress named, appropriately enough, Damocles. But as that particular conflict marks the finale of our story, I think it's appropriate that we first cover the conflict between Lelouch and Emperor Charles. Oh yeah, we find out during the show that Lelouch is in fact one of the Britannian Emperor's many children. He was banished to Japan with his blind and crippled sister Nunnally following the assassination of their mother. Or, in the eyes of Charles, he was sent away for safekeeping while the Emperor and Empress, who actually survived due to her own Geass power that allowed her to literally take over another person's body, continued to bring their plan to fruition. That plan being, destroy all lies, make it impossible for one person to lie to another. How does the Emperor intend to bring about this utopia of truth? Well, according to him, by returning the world to its true nature.
And I shall show you the true nature of this world. You are me and I am you. All else is illusion.
Emperor Charles intends to bring the entire world into a single collective consciousness. Then there can be no lies because everyone shares everything. The exact mechanics of this are not explored in the show, but looked at philosophically, what Charles desires is an erasure of individualism, of choice, of free will, and personhood. And the thing is, his desired utopia would, in theory, be a place of peace where war, crime, violence, aggression of any kind would not be possible, because for me to harm you would mean I also harm me, not to mention the rest of humanity who would be me and thus obviously not want to take actions that are harming me and thus you and thus everyone. But is such a life worth the price that humanity would pay? Is it worth giving up our ability to choose for ourselves, to be our own person? Let's talk about Lelouch's response to those questions first.
Everyone uses lies, and everyone wears a different face.
The conflict between father and son here is largely focused on lies, at least on the surface. Lelouch obviously has been living a lie, and not just since he donned the mask and became Zero. He sees lies and falsehoods and doesn't place a lot of moral weight on them. Would he rather not use them? Perhaps. He does regret having to lie to his sister and friends time after time after time, but that guilt is nothing compared to his urgent need to defeat his father and establish a new world order. But on a deeper level, their clash is about free will itself. Should humans be allowed to make choices, even poor and destructive ones? Charles and Marianne obviously answer in the negative.
Then everyone can be exactly who they're supposed to be.
Not want to be, not choose to be, but supposed to be. The obvious question in this moment should be, of course, supposed to be according to who exactly? Charles, I guess, who somehow knows what is best for humanity as a whole, or at least that's what he would think. Else, why would he bother with this plan, with his creation of the singular consciousness, with his intent to, as he put it, kill God? I'm not exactly sure what the theology and metaphysics of Code Geass are, as they leave those quite vague, but I take it to mean that Charles intends to replace God, whatever that divine entity may be in this particular world, and take his place, thinking himself a much more suitable caretaker for mankind. If he were God, you see, there would be no lies, no wars, no illness, no suffering. Emperor Charles is attempting to tackle the problem of evil by simply eradicating all evil from the planet. Problem being, he would also then destroy all that is good. In order to refer to anything we humans do as good, there must be a choice. The actions of other animals, driven purely by instinct, are not morally good or bad, they just are. In Charles' designs, humans would be no better or worse than the rest of nature. The only distinction would be the enhanced harmony of humanity. But that harmony, when it can be found in our current world, is only beautiful because it has emerged through the free will of people who could have very easily chosen dissonance and violence. I find this to be among the most profound solutions to the problem of evil. Evil exists only because we are free to choose it. But without that choice, we could not know goodness. We could not live as we are meant to live. We could not love as we are called to love. C2 tells Lelouch that her Geass made people fall in love with her, but their love was, in reality, a forced, fawning obsession.
Love without limit was love without meaning.
That's an interesting statement, and yes, I know the subbed version says something different, but since I don't speak Japanese, I have no idea if sub or dub is more accurate to the original, so I'm going with the one that I can understand. A more accurate way to express C2's realization would be that love without choice is love without meaning. Or it could be that her Geass made people love her as a lonely child would define love, and that love never evolved as she aged. We see from Lelouch that the wielder of Geass does not have firm control over his power, so that does seem likely. This is admittedly a bit of a tangent, but I had to take it because I think love should be limitless if it is pure love. To love another person means to will their good, to work toward what is genuinely good for them. Obviously, starting a religion around someone is not doing her or anyone else any favors, so the love created by C2's Geass can hardly be called real love. Part of what makes the love, particularly romantic love, between two humans so special is that it is preferential. We choose to love someone in particular when we could have chosen a million others. And in that love is a promise. I will be by your side today, tomorrow, and the rest of my earthly days. I will be yours without restraint or condition because I choose to be so. This is how it ought to be. So when Marianne says everyone can be exactly who they are supposed to be, her logic is self-defeating. Yes, we are supposed to be perfectly virtuous in every way, but there is a higher order to our design than that. We are supposed to be free. We must be free to choose to become who we are supposed to be. Christian theology makes a distinction between God's perfect will, what God desires, and his permissive will, what he allows. God does have a plan for our lives, a perfect plan, and although he permits us to wander off path, he always desires we return to that path. I'm grossly oversimplifying things, but it'll have to do. Those choices that God allows are quite plainly what make us human. Without them, we would be mere automatons, indistinguishable from one another, geassed into adoration, but never capable of actual love. And that is what Charles wants to create. Lelouch, on the other hand, takes a more personalistic view. Whatever his flaws flaws are, and they are many, he has always cared about the individual, mostly Nunnally, and he despises his father for treating him and his sister with such disdain.
The plan was such a priority for you both that it didn't matter to either of you if Nonnally and I were alive or dead.
Although Lelouch is experiencing all the rage you might expect out of an abandoned son, he's not at all wrong. A father's duty to his children is higher than his duty to the world. Not that he doesn't bear any responsibility for the society in which he lives, but how can you change the world for the better if you can't even maintain peace within your own home? I suppose you could sum up Emperor Charles' philosophy by saying that he longs for a peaceful, harmonious past that never truly existed. At least not since Eve ate that damned apple. As for Lelouch, well...
What I want is tomorrow!
Lelouch is the quintessential protagonist stuck in a real crappy situation who is actually quite idealistic but ends up having to do terrible things to see his ideal achieved because otherwise it just wouldn't be achieved. And the audience obviously knows he's not morally justified, but there wouldn't be a story if he did the right thing and just stopped. So here we are. I feel like there's a more concise way to say that. And when your main character is morally compromised in such a fashion, you have to have villains who are even more despicable. Sure, Lelouch's lies and Geass' dominations aren't good, but they're an awful lot better than stealing away the identity of every single person on Earth. Still, it is good that we see Lelouch struggle with the horror caused by his use of Geass, most poignantly when he reaches the point where he can no longer turn it on and off and inadvertently orders his sister Euphemia to kill all the Japanese. In the ensuing carnage, Lelouch happens upon a dying woman.
You're Japan's savior.
Don't call me your savior.
Any normal person would have said no thank you when offered a mysterious contract by a girl who just popped out of an enormous metal shell, but any normal person would have called it quits right about here. That's it. The Geass has gone too far. I'm out. But Lelouch is not a normal person. Given power, he cannot help but wield it. Again, it is not so much that Geass corrupted him, but that it gave him the ability to do what he always wanted to do, and the more he uses it, the more he commits himself to that end. And to nobody's surprise, Lelouch is not the only one of Emperor Charles' children to think in such a manner. Let's turn our attention to Schneizel, shall we? Prince Schneizel's philosophy is really quite simple. Men are nasty, incorrigible, deceitful, lustful, violent animals who cannot and will not change, and so must be forcibly restrained in order to maintain peace. To that end, he commissions the aforementioned Sky Fortress Damocles, armed with numerous Flea warheads, which are really just powerful missiles, nukes, minus the radiation, I guess. Should the Damocles reach geosynchronous orbit in the show's finale, it would pose an existential threat to any and all would-be troublemakers around the world, thus bringing an end to the wars that have plagued mankind for its entire history. I have to say that I really like Schneizel as a character, and aside from his willingness to sacrifice
1 or 2 billion lives to achieve a state of permanent peace,
he's not so bad a guy. Princess Cornelia even says that in another world he would be a good ruler.
He isn't driven by the ambition that egoists have.
And as far as solutions go, his is certainly more preferable than that of Charles. I don't know about you, but I'd much rather live under the threat of nuclear annihilation than, not really be a person at all. Though, maybe that's because I've never known a world where a thermonuclear holocaust has not been possible, so it's just kind of normal for me, but that's an entirely different subject, and I'd rather not delve into that particular mine right now. But back to Schneizel. Another thing I genuinely liked about his character is his commitment to his plan and his disregard for his own well-being. When Lelouch infiltrates the Damocles, Schneizel doesn't call off the Flea that is supposed to destroy the Sky Fortress, and Lelouch along with it, even after he finds himself trapped aboard. Not that blowing oneself up is a good thing, but it shows that he does in fact serve a cause greater than himself, which is not overly common among villains. I suppose that's because Schneizel isn't really a villain, certainly not like Charles was. Okay, he does destroy an entire city and lie to Nunnally about giving the citizens sufficient warning to evacuate.
And you told Nunnally!
lies are expedient.
But in terms of morality, the gap between him and Lelouch isn't all that big. You could argue that Lelouch's sins, namely his repeated overriding of the free will of others, are far more heinous than the murders committed by Schneizel. Both men, to some extent, believe that the end justifies the means, but they differ significantly on 2 fronts. First, their actual end. Schneizel, to reiterate, would bring peace to the world by holding every man, woman, and child at sword point, because He believes that is what they deserve, because he is certain the ills of the world and the evils of humanity cannot be stamped out any other way.
The lust that dwells within the soul of man cannot be denied.
In short, he lacks hope. He rejects the belief that mankind can change, can learn from its history and its many, many mistakes. Lelouch, on the other hand, insists that human nature will evolve, that we will overcome our faults and failings, that we can bridge divisions and heal wounds if only people are given the chance to pursue happiness.
Human nature is why I chose Geass and to wear a mask.
That brings me to the second and most crucial difference in the philosophy of these two brothers. Yes, they are both willing to use horrible methods to commit grievous sins to achieve their desired goals, but while Schneizel believes himself personally justified in doing so, Lelouch acknowledges that he is not. Although I'm not so sure Schneizel even thinks about the morality of what he does. He desires peace. He thinks peace is what mankind needs. He designs a plan to enforce peace. He acts on that plan. Simple as that.
So why win hearts and minds or tout some shining ideology? Why not bring peace to the world with a system and power?
As with Charles, Schneizel is willing to be God, kill God, replace God, and generally do whatever it takes to see his vision accomplished, not caring or even thinking about the moral weight of his actions upon his own soul. Not so with Lelouch. Yes, our protagonist is a hypocrite, fighting for the right of all people to self-determination, even while he uses his Geass to strip his victims of their free will. But he knows that. He acknowledges his every sin. They weigh heavily upon his soul, as he hints at when confronting the United Federation of Nations.
What trait is most important for governing the world? The will to destroy.
Destroy?
Destroy the world, and even oneself!
And in the end, that is exactly what he does. Lelouch becomes an emperor, a tyrant, the one single person upon whom the world can direct all their hatred. In his final confrontation with Nunnally, Lelouch is unwilling to use his Geass on her, on his sister, for whose sake he embarked on this crusade. That is, until he realizes her mind is not unlike his own.
The Damocles will become a symbol of their hatred.
Both brother and sister believe that, given an undeniable common enemy, humanity will resolve their other differences and choose to work together in harmony. If Nunnally is willing to use such a means to that end, then she would, Lelouch's logic states, accept him using his Geass on her in order to set himself up as that great uniter of mankind, the despot whose death would inspire a new era of peace. So he has Suzaku don the mask and mantle of Zero and kill him.
I destroy the world and create it anew.
We are then treated to a wildly idealistic voiceover from Colin, who tells us how Lelouch's assassination inspired an end to war, poverty, and disease. I mean, maybe not a complete end, but the world that Colin describes is certainly far more idyllic than any that has ever existed in history, which made me chuckle, because that's not how that would work. The idea that Lelouch's death would somehow not cause a power struggle is quite plainly ludicrous, especially given the fact that there are so many ambitious, cutthroat characters in this show. Sure, a common enemy can unite people, but once that enemy is gone, we tend to pick another one, often each other. But we had to have Lelouch's tomorrow actually arrive, otherwise all his horrific deeds would be for nothing. Which they are. I'm sorry, I can't help but inject my own philosophy here. As I said, I do think this ending is wildly inconsistent with basic logic and human behavior, but more importantly, although the show as a whole admits that Lelouch is not personally justified in doing all that he did, he does die for his sins, it still kind of implies that on a global scale what he did was necessary, and therefore kind of good. Nope. The ends do not justify the means. Full stop. If you can't think of any way to reach your desired goal, even a very good and noble goal, except through devious and sinful methods, too bad. Pick a different goal. Why? Because how we act, especially if we are in positions of authority and power, is how those who see us will act. Evil begets evil. Lelouch would undoubtedly be followed by 1,000 would-be dictators all fighting each other to claim his throne. Still, as a whole, I thought the philosophy of Code Geass and of the three characters discussed here was well worth my time. I appreciated the show delving into the minds of deeply flawed yet well-intentioned men placed in rather difficult situations. And admittedly, having Lelouch act in a righteous manner would mean that there probably wouldn't be much of a story, but I would have written a different ending. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Code Geass. Have you seen it? What do you think of the philosophy and morality portrayed in Charles, Schneizel, and Lelouch, or other characters? Lots of those you could talk about. Arguably too many characters, but that's not the point of this video. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, God bless, and I'll see you next time.